Deep winter, 1883. Snow had fallen for 2 days straight, and it showed no sign of stopping. The wind shrieked through the pine trees like it had lost something it could never get back. Sarah Monroe tightened the wool blanket around her shoulders, shifting the 2 bundles in her arms. Each bundle was wrapped in whatever cloth she had left, her daughters, Ellie and Emily, barely over a year old. They hadn't eaten since the morning. Her own body shook with fever, her lips were cracked, and every breath burned her throat. But she kept walking. She had no choice. Once, she'd had a home, a husband who came back each evening coated in coal dust, arms strong but heart gentler than any man she'd ever known. Then the mine collapsed. They didn't even recover the body. The owner of the mine, the same man who'd signed her husband's debt note, showed up a week later, demanding repayment. So, she ran. Now, somewhere deep in the forest between Silver Ridge and the hunter's outpost, she was lost. The food was gone. The flask empty. Her boots soaked through. The girls whimpered in their sleep. Then, through the blizzard, a shape emerged. A slanted roof, half-collapsed walls, an abandoned trapper's shelter. Sarah stumbled forward, nearly dropping Ellie. She kicked the door in with a cry she barely heard over the wind. Inside, dust and ash and mold, but shelter. She laid the girls down, used her own coat to line the floor, found a few dry sticks, some pine bark. Her hands shook as she struck steel and flint. Spark, spark, then flame. The fire crackled weakly, but it was enough. For a while, she huddled with the girls through the night, holding them close. Her cough grew worse, her limbs numb. The fire died out 3 times. Each time, she restarted it. But there was no more wood, no more warmth to borrow. The fever made her dizzy. Her fingers trembled when she touched the children's cheeks. Still warm, but barely. Her tears dried on her face before they could fall. She knew what she had to do. Just before dawn, Sarah forced herself to her knees. Her legs barely worked. She wrapped Ellie and Emily tighter in their shared blanket, placing her knife under the edge where Ellie's small hand could find it. She pulled a crust of bread from her coat, hard, stale, nearly inedible, and broke it in half, placing one piece beside each of them. Then she bent down and kissed each forehead. "I will come back for you," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "Mama's just going to get help." They didn't stir. She sat back on her heels for a long moment, listening to the silence between their shallow breaths. Then she opened the door. The wind hit her like a wall. Her fever spiked the moment she stepped out, but her body moved anyway. She did not look back. She could not. Because if she did, if she let herself see them again, helpless and alone on that cabin floor, she would fall apart, she would stay, and then they would all die. Instead, she braced herself and walked into the white. Behind her, 2 sleeping girls lay bundled in a pile of torn blankets, guarded by a fading ember, and a promise whispered by a mother who had nothing left to give, but still gave everything. The forest swallow fed her whole. The wind had teeth that night, gnawing at every seam in Hayes Calder's coat. Snow came at a slant, blinding, relentless. He tugged his scarf higher and pressed forward, the reins in his numb fingers barely registering the tremble of his horse beneath him. He was lost. Again. But this time, there was no one waiting on the other side, no warm cabin, no one to call him back. Hayes hadn't been home in 5 winters. The word meant little now. A distant sound sliced through the white silence. A cry. He pulled up sharply. The wind howled louder, as if trying to swallow it whole. He listened. Again, thin, muffled, but unmistakable. A child. Hayes dismounted, boots crunching over frost. He left the horse and followed the sound through a line of snow-heavy trees. Then he saw it, a half-collapsed shelter, barely more than a shadow beneath the storm. Inside, 2 small bodies huddled together on the frozen floor, wrapped in a thin wool blanket. A cold fire pit nearby held only ash. He dropped to his knees. The girls were still breathing, but barely. Lips blue, hands curled into fists against the cold. One of them stirred, her eyes fluttering open just enough to look at him. "Where's Mama?" she whispered, the words no more than breath. Hayes froze. The same question had once echoed through his own life, in a cabin far from here. A question he hadn't answered in time. A girl with hair the color of wild honey, gone before morning because he had waited 1 hour too long to look for her. He swallowed hard, didn't answer. Instead, he pulled off his coat, wrapped it around the girls, and lifted them both gently into his arms. The older one whimpered, but didn't cry. He walked quickly, feet sure despite the numbness. The wind shoved him sideways. Branches scraped his face. He knew of a rock hollow nearby. He'd passed it yesterday. Dry, sheltered, barely enough for one person. It would have to do. The cave was cold but safer. He laid the girls down on pine needles and pulled their bodies close. He stripped off his outer layers, built a new fire with what dry bark he could scavenge, and held them tight as the heat grew. The younger girl stirred in her sleep, pressing her face to his chest. The other mumbled something he didn't catch. Hayes stared at the flame. His hands trembled, not from cold. He had not held anyone in years, had not let himself feel responsible for another soul since that day. But these girls, he did not know their names, or where their mother was, or if help would ever come. Yet they were here, breathing, because he had come. Not soon, but not too late. He shifted one of the girls higher against his shoulder. Her skin warmed slowly, painfully. "I don't know where your mama is," he whispered at last. But in his mind, another voice answered back. "Then, you better go find her." Morning broke over the frost-bitten forest, not with sunlight, but with a pale gray that seeped through the trees like the breath of something half-dead. Hayes Calder crouched outside the cave entrance, his breath clouding in the air. The twins were curled up under layers of wool, their tiny hands twitching in restless sleep. He had not slept. All night, he stared at the fire, at their faces, and at the space where their mother should have been. At dawn, he stood, slung his saddlebag over his shoulder, and whispered to the twins, "I'm gonna find her." Hayes scanned the snow. Despite the wind, faint traces of footprints remained, angling northeast. He recognized the spacing of them, hurried, uneven, not made by someone wandering, but running, driven. "She went into the storm for them," he murmured. "Hell of a thing." He wrapped the girls in his coat and tied a rope around them both to his chest, anchoring them as he moved slowly into the drifts. Each step was a fight. Snow swallowed his boots, ice clung to his lashes. They passed twisted trees bent under frost, heard the groan of frozen trunks cracking. The wind clawed his ears. After hours, Hayes's knees buckled on a steep incline. One misstep, and he nearly slid, clutching a branch at the last second. He pressed the girls tighter. "You all right?" he muttered. Ellie whimpered but nodded. Emily's head rested against his neck. Her skin was cold. The sun had begun to sink when the world went silent, too silent. Hayes paused. In the trees, something shifted. Low growls. His spine stiffened. He turned slowly, squinting through the falling snow. Then he saw them, eyes first. 4, maybe 5 wolves, thin, ribs poking through winter-starved fur. Hungry. He backed up, heart thudding. "Not today," he said through gritted teeth. One wolf stepped forward, baring yellow teeth. Hayes shifted, pulled the rifle from his back with one hand, keeping the girls steady with the other. His finger tensed on the trigger. A howl tore the air. The lead wolf lunged. Hayes fired. The echo blasted through the trees. The wolf tumbled into the snow, not dead, but dazed. The others flinched. He fired again, into the air. The pack hesitated. "I ain't meat," Hayes hissed. "And these girls sure as hell ain't either." After a long breath, the wolves backed into the trees. Hayes didn't relax. He turned and ran. By nightfall, he found shelter under a craggy ledge, a partial rock overhang, not a cave, but enough to block the wind. He built a fire with trembling hands, set the girls down wrapped in his bedroll. He kept the rifle in his lap. All night, he watched. Every snap of twig made him tighten his grip. Snow swirled beyond the flames, a white prison of silence and howls. Around midnight, Ellie stirred and whispered, "Where's Mama?" Hayes looked down, met her wide, tired eyes. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But in the firelight, he saw something new. Not fear, determination. "She went for you," he said finally. "That's brave." He looked into the woods, where somewhere, a woman had stepped into the storm alone. A woman who left everything, carried nothing, but still believed she might return. Hayes closed his eyes, feeling something shift deep in his chest. Long ago, he'd let his little sister walk away, promising he'd follow. He never did. Not fast enough. Now, he wouldn't make that mistake again. In the silence, with a rifle across his lap and 2 sleeping girls beside him, Hayes made a vow. He would find her, not because he owed it, but because she'd gone alone when no one else would have. And someone had to be the one who showed up. Tomorrow, the search would continue. But tonight, he did not sleep. Not until the fire died out and the wind settled. Not until he was sure no wolves, no ghosts, no regrets would take them in the dark. The snow had let up, but the cold still bit like broken glass. Hayes pushed through thickets of pine, his boots crunching silently over the crusted snow. On his back, Emily dozed, bundled in the folds of his coat. In his arms, Ellie blinked sleepily, head resting against his collarbone. He had followed the tracks for nearly a day now, faint, wind-blown, but still there. Then he saw it. Smoke, thin, gray, curling from a chimney barely holding above the treetops. Hayes dropped to his knees behind a ridge. Down below, nestled in a clearing, stood an old mining outpost. The wood was rotted in places, but recent footprints marked the area. Horses were tied near the edge of the tree line. And just outside the crooked porch, 2 men with rifles, one pacing, the other slumped drunk against a barrel. Inside, a single window glowed with firelight. Hayes narrowed his eyes. Through the glass, he caught the blurred movement of someone chained to the bedpost, frail, slumped over, arms wrapped around herself. He knew. Sarah. He felt Ellie shift. She stirred. And he kissed the top of her head. "Shh, Mama's close." He waited for the drunk to snore deeper. When the second man walked behind the shed to relieve himself, Hayes moved, quick, low to the ground, rifle strapped to his back, the twins secured in thick fur against his chest. He slipped to the rear of the shack. A broken window was covered with a torn curtain. Carefully, he peered through. Sarah was lying on the floor now. Her lips were cracked, hair damp with sweat. She was burning up, but her eyes, those were alive, sharp, watching the door, clenched. Inside, a third man leaned over her, his voice low and cruel. "Just tell us where the rest is, lady. You walked out with a pack. We know there's something worth taking." Sarah didn't flinch. She rasped, "All I had was my kids." The man lifted his hand, then stopped. Behind him, a whisper, metal against air. Hayes had opened the door. He stepped in, with Ellie still pressed to his chest and the other slung to his back. His rifle wasn't pointed, but it didn't have to be. Sarah blinked, dazed. "Ellie?" The man turned too slowly. Hayes hit him once, fast, with the butt of his rifle. The man collapsed like a sack of grain. Ellie reached out toward her mother. "Mama!" Sarah choked on a sob. "Emily, Ellie." Then her knees gave. Hayes dropped beside her, catching her before she hit the floor. "I told them nothing," she whispered. "Not a word. Not about them." "You don't have to," Hayes said. "You held on long enough." She looked at him, wild with fever. "Who are you?" Hayes adjusted his grip on both girls. "The man who found them before the cold did. Outside, the drunken guard stirred. Hayes cursed under his breath. He moved fast, half carrying, half dragging Sarah as the girls clung to her arms. Back through the trees, ducking behind shadows, weaving around crunching branches. The cold stung her skin. She was burning up and freezing all at once. By the time they reached the shelter of the trees, Sarah could barely stand. Her breaths came in short gasps. "Just a little farther," Hayes murmured. "The cave's warm. We'll get you through this." But Sarah had already passed out, her head resting against his chest. He looked down at the three of them, two small, fragile girls, and the woman who had walked through a storm alone. He held them closer. Behind them, the smoke of the outpost rose slowly into the darkening sky. Hayes didn't look back. The cold crept deeper that night, not in the wind, but in Sarah's breathing. It had started as a cough, dry, harmless. But as Hayes knelt by the fire, stirring melted snow to warm, he could hear it turn, wet, rasping. Her hands trembled as she held the girls, and a pink flush colored her cheeks where there should have been pale. "Lie down," Hayes said. Sarah shook her head. "The girls. I'll watch them." She stared at him for a moment, as if measuring whether trust could be borrowed when it could no longer be earned. Then she nodded, her body folded beside the fire. The girls curled at her side. By midnight, her skin burned, her lips cracked, and her breathing turned shallow. Hayes pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. It was like touching coal. "Pneumonia," he muttered. "No herbs, no medicine. Nothing in the cave but wet stone, cold wind, and 3 lives he wasn't willing to lose." He covered them in his coat, stoked the fire higher than he dared, then grabbed his rifle and pack. Before leaving, he tore a strip from his old scarf and laid it beside Sarah's hand. Something she could see, something to say. "I will be back." Then he stepped into the snow. The climb up the ridge was slow and brutal. The storm had eased, but snow crusted the trees like iron. The trail to the hunter's station lay beyond the pass, 4 miles of steep terrain and no promise of safety. Each step was a negotiation. Ice cracked underfoot, wind howled past the peaks, and the night sky was black as coal. He slipped once, caught himself, slipped again, slid 10 feet down, boots scrabbling. Then, near the summit, a ridge collapsed under his foot. Snow and man tumbled together, crashing down the slope. Hayes rolled, slammed into a frozen trunk, and barely avoided the edge of a sheer drop. He lay there, gasping, the world spinning. Blood trickled from his temple, staining the snow red. But when he opened his eyes, he saw Sarah's face. Not the sick one, the strong one. The woman who had walked into a storm, alone, to save her daughters. Hayes rose. At dawn, the hunter's shack appeared through the trees, small, squat, smoke curling weakly from its chimney. He stumbled to the door and pounded once before collapsing. A grizzled man opened. "Damn, you look like the Reaper's cousin." "Need meds," Hayes rasped. "For pneumonia. Got a woman, 2 kids." The hunter stared. "I've got jerky," Hayes said. "Blankets, ammo. What do I look like? A banker?" The man spat into the snow, then pointed at the saddlebag Hayes carried. "You got a decent saddle?" Hayes nodded. "Then, we've got a trade." 2 hours later, Hayes rode back, bareback, saddle traded for a tin box of antibiotics and dried fever bark. Every bone in his body screamed, but he didn't stop. By nightfall, he reached the cave. Inside, the girls whimpered in their sleep. Sarah's breath came in shallow bursts, her skin a frightening gray. Hayes built the fire high again, boiled snow, added the bark, broke the vial open and coaxed drops between Sarah's lips. Then he sat beside her. For hours, wet cloth against her forehead, steam near her nose. Every 30 minutes, he pressed his fingers to her wrist, checking her pulse, counting time by the weight of her breath. At some point, he fell asleep, sitting upright, one hand still on her arm. Morning came. The girls stirred first, nestling against their mother. Then Sarah's eyes opened. Hayes wasn't looking when it happened. He was fixing the fire. But he felt her gaze. She looked down. On the stone beside her, wrapped in a strip of faded cloth, was the medicine, tied with a knot that was sloppy and fraying, but clearly done with care. Her fingers touched it gently. She didn't ask him where he had gone, didn't ask how he had found her, or what it cost. She just looked across the cave at Hayes, the two girls now dozing in his lap, and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't answer, but he did smile, just barely. A flicker of warmth in a man who had almost forgotten how. The wind had started whispering again, cold, sharp, as if carrying old voices through the trees. Hayes stood outside the rebuilt cabin, sharpening a rusted blade, his breath plumed in the air. Inside, Sarah stacked firewood near the hearth, her movements slow but steady. Her fever had broken, and the color had returned to her face, but the fear hadn't left her eyes. Atop the table, his rifle lay in parts. Beside it, a small revolver, cleaned and loaded. For Sarah. "They will come," he had said earlier that day. Sarah had nodded. "I know." The trapper at the outpost had done what Hayes feared, spread word, and the kind of men chasing debts didn't stop when winter arrived. They followed rumors like hounds on blood. That night, the sky was black silk, no stars. The fire inside the cabin crackled low, casting orange glows on wooden walls. The twins were asleep, Emily curled in a wool blanket, Ellie holding a ragged toy Hayes had stitched from his old coat. Outside, Hayes moved like a shadow, checking each snare and tripwire. Metal teeth of the bear traps waited just beneath snow. He had hidden them well, too well. A wrong step could kill. Then came the sound, a distant rustle. He dropped low behind the chopping block. Footsteps. 3 of them, slow, careful, speaking low, just enough for wind to carry. "She's in there," a gruff voice said. "The woman. We grab her, check for the stash, and go." Hayes waited, breath shallow. One man veered left, circling the cabin. Another crept straight ahead, toward the porch. The third? Gone. Then, snap! A scream tore through the night. Metal shrieked. The man on the left had stepped into the trap. Hayes heard bone crunch, the man wailing. The one on the porch spun, raising his weapon. Hayes fired. The shot echoed like thunder. The man dropped, his rifle clattering beside him. Inside, Sarah jerked upright. She rushed to the window. Hayes was already moving toward the third. But she didn't see him. She saw the back door creak open. A shadow slipped in. Sarah grabbed the revolver. The man stepped forward, scarf over his face, blade in hand. "Don't be stupid, lady. You come with me. No one gets hurt." Sarah raised the revolver. Her hands trembled, but her stance was firm. "My daughters are in this room. I ain't here for them." "That's your mistake," she whispered. He lunged. She fired. The shot blasted into the ceiling. Splinters rained down. The man froze. Hayes burst in from the front, tackling him to the floor. They rolled, Hayes striking hard, fast. The man's knife clattered away. Hayes slammed his fist again, blood splashing his sleeve. The man went limp. Hayes stood over him, chest heaving. Sarah hadn't moved. The gun was still raised. Her hands shaking now. Hayes gently touched her wrist. "It's over." Tears welled in her eyes. "I missed." "No," he said. "You warned him. That was enough." Behind them, the twins had begun to cry. Sarah rushed to them, dropping the gun. She held them close, whispering soft lullabies through tears. Hayes dragged the unconscious man out into the snow. He tied him beside the one in the trap. The third was already dead. The night felt heavier than before. The cold bit deeper. But the cabin stood. No one had been taken. Inside, Sarah tucked the girls into bed again, brushing their hair, her voice hoarse. Hayes returned silently. She looked at him. "I was ready to kill. You were ready to protect." She lowered her gaze. I never want to do that again. Hayes nodded. That's why I'll stay. They sat together in silence. The fire crackled again, and outside, the wind passed through the trees, not as a warning, but as if exhaling after holding its breath. The snow had begun to melt. It happened slowly, first in patches, like old secrets thawing in sunlight. Then, across the yard, the ground turned soft, and the white gave way to wet earth and brown grass, gasping for warmth. Sarah stood at the doorway of the old cabin, hands wrapped around a tin mug of weak coffee. Her face was thinner, her cheeks still pale, but there was a steadiness in her eyes. Behind her, the twins giggled as they tumbled over one another in the muddy yard, chasing a stick that Hayes had carved into the shape of a wooden bird. Life had not returned all at once, but it had returned. Inside the cabin, Hayes sat hunched over a piece of old wool. He said nothing as his fingers worked, slow and deliberate. The wool was from his coat, frayed edges, thinned with time, but he twisted it, looped it, wove it. He had never made anything before, but this felt necessary, a quiet offering. He finished by dusk, placed the scarf, crooked, lumpy, warm, on the foot of Sarah's bed, and left without a word. She found it later that night. No note, no explanation. She stood still for a long time, fingers brushing the uneven stitchwork. It smelled faintly of pine, wool, and smoke. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She folded it slowly, pressed it to her chest, and held it there. The next day, a wagon creaked up the trail. Hayes was chopping wood by the tree line when he saw it. A group of 4 men, wearing merchants' coats, rifles strapped to the side of the wagon, eyes scanning the property with intent. Sarah was inside, reading softly to the girls. Hayes didn't call out, he didn't knock. He stepped up to the cabin door, entered, and said only, "Stay with them." She looked up. "What is it?" "Businessmen," he replied, "but not the kind you sell to." Her breath caught. She moved to the window, watching the wagon draw closer. "I'll handle it," Hayes said. She nodded, pressing her lips to the twins' heads. Hayes met the men in the yard. The leader, a slick-haired man with 2 white gloves, climbed down and tipped his hat. "We're looking for a Sarah Monroe. She owes a debt to the Weston Mining Company. Property seized, payment overdue." Hayes didn't blink. "You're late," the man smirked. "Well, we're here now, and the law's on our side." Hayes reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He handed it to the man, who unfolded it, frowning. It was brittle from time and travel, but the ink was clear. A legal notice declaring the dissolution of the Weston Mining Company after the collapse and death toll. No assets, no claims, no pursuable debt. "She's not here anymore," Hayes said quietly. "And even if she was, you would have no right." The man read the paper again. One of his companions grumbled something about it not being worth the ride. The third spat into the dirt. The leader looked up. "Who are you to her?" Hayes didn't answer, just stared. And that was enough. They left without another word, wagon creaking over softening snow. Inside the cabin, Sarah watched them disappear into the trees. "They're gone," Hayes said as he returned. "They won't come back." Sarah rose from the chair, walked toward him. Her fingers reached up, brushing a piece of sawdust from his shirt. "You kept it," she murmured. "That paper. I keep what matters." She didn't speak, but when she walked back inside, she passed the scarf on the bed, picked it up, and draped it around her neck. Patchy, imperfect, hers. Outside, the twins called for her. "Mama, come play." Sarah stepped into the yard, the scarf wrapped around her shoulders, sun beginning to bleed through the clouds, and for the first time in months, she laughed. Not because danger was gone, but because something stronger had stayed. The cabin Hayes built was no longer just a shelter. It was a home. Logs hewed by hand, corners sealed tight with moss and clay. The roof was pitched steep against the snow, the windows small but looking out into the open field. now thawed and green around the edges. Each board, each nail, had been placed with quiet care. Hayes worked most mornings before the sun had cleared the tree line. He fixed the fence that lined the property, checked the traps by the creek, stacked wood for a fire that never fully went out. And every now and then, between splitting logs and hauling stone, he would stop. Not because he was tired, but because, across the yard, Sarah sat with the twins, Ellie and Emily, showing them how to read letters carved into scraps of wood, teaching them to light tinder, sing the old lullabies, sweep out dust from the floor they now called theirs. It was never loud, but it was always warm. And Hayes, once always standing apart, stood closer each day. By spring, his path from the barn to the door had left a worn trail. He no longer paused at the fence post, no longer lingered by the edge of the clearing. The sound of Sarah's laugh had become something he looked for, like the smell of firewood, like the color of dawn. One evening, after the girls had fallen asleep beside the hearth and the wind had grown still, Sarah stepped out onto the porch. She wore the scarf he had made for her. It had grown softer with time. Hayes sat, sharpening a knife by lantern light. She stood watching for a while, arms wrapped around herself. Then she spoke. "If I'm not running anymore," she said, voice low, "do you want me to stay?" He didn't look up right away, but his hands stopped moving. He set down the knife, wiped his fingers on a cloth, and walked over to where she stood. The lantern flickered between them. He reached out slowly, took her hand, held it. No words. He did not need them. Inside, the twins stirred. The dog, no longer a pup, but loyal and quiet, rose from beside the fire and padded to Sarah's feet, nuzzling her ankle. She looked down at Hayes's hand around hers, then up at his face, and smiled. The next morning, Hayes rose early again, but this time, when he stepped outside, Sarah was already up. She was lighting the fire pit behind the house, teaching the girls how to cook beans over an open flame. He watched as Emily dropped a spoon and burst into laughter, and Sarah wiped the child's nose with the edge of her sleeve, grinning. He watched her hum a tune under her breath as she stirred the pot, watched her braid Ellie's hair into 2 clumsy ropes, watched her like a man who had known silence and now wanted to learn every note of a song. That night, they ate together around the fire. The girls curled against Sarah's side, the dog at their feet. Hayes sat close, legs stretched out, staring into the flame. Sarah turned to him. "Are you happy here?" He nodded, then added, "I never was. Before." She leaned her head on his shoulder. The fire popped. The stars came out in clusters. Far beyond the treetops, the mountains shimmered with melting snow. Water from high above had begun to run in quiet streams through the rocks and brush, spring breaking through the last of winter's grip. And there, in that soft hush, with the warmth of the fire on their faces and the world no longer chasing behind, 3 souls sat still for the first time, not hiding, not surviving, just home. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt the wind through the pines, the heat of the fire, and the weight of silence that says more than words, then we invite you to ride with us again. Little Twins Were Sleeping on the Cold Ground isn't just a story about survival. It's about finding warmth after the freeze. It's about love that's built, not promised. And sometimes it's about the quiet cowboy who stays.